my work looks at AI and data technologies in cultural organizations from the perspective of that of a researcher and an outsider. So I don't work within a cultural institution, but instead my role is to provide strategic insights to help cultural organizations, primarily museums, for this research project, to develop their policy and practices when it comes to using AI technologies. And so I'm going to do a little bit of a scene setting to start my talk today. I think it's useful to engage with some popular culture narratives around what these technologies have promised us in the past, what they promise us today, and what they might offer us in the future. But also to have a little bit of a reality check so that we can think about our own usage of technology platforms today. Because quite often we use technology platforms every day, but they somewhat blend into the background. We don't consciously use them. They're quite pervasive. And when we have conversations about AI technologies, we often talk about black box, about this inability to understand the technology. But really, before we can start to have that conversation, that critical engagement with AI technologies or emerging sentient technologies, we actually need to ask some critical questions of the more open and easily understandable technologies that we use every day. So if we go back to the very beginning being a cartoon, the Jetsons was a cartoon that really led with a technology future aspect. Utopian dreams where work was carried out by machines as we all enjoy a constant life of leisure. This idea of flying cars is something that's been embedded in popular culture from cartoons to fiction to films for a long time. And some of it is starting to become reality. Whilst popular culture has given us examples of exciting possibilities, it's also served as a warning to dystopian futures, a narrative of dystopian disasters where freedom and creativity have vanished and we've essentially been taken over by machines. Or a totalitarian robot state has taken over and our everyday movements are monitored and controlled through facial recognition technology, biometric monitoring. Again, some of this might feel utopian or dystopian, but some of it's already reality. The reality will likely be a lot more nuanced and exist somewhere between this utopian and dystopian fiction. Indeed, in 2022, I think it's safe to say that neither utopia nor dystopia has arrived, and neither of these fictional narratives fully depict the use of machine learning technologies in our everyday lives. So what does this look like in practice? Well, machine learning helps to filter spam from my inbox, and it attempts to help me structure emails. Citymapper, Google Maps help me to travel in the most efficient way possible. They're able to respond to live conditions and recalibrate my journey as I move. On the web, my search results are improved, meaning that I find what I'm looking for quickly, but also limiting any serendipitous opportunities for discovery, whether that's to find an article about an unknown female scientist or a local hairdresser who doesn't pay to advertise online. The thousands of photos I take on my phone on a monthly basis are neatly tagged and categorized, so I can search for pictures of my birthday or look for the picture I took of a receipt during my last work trip. But these technologies are simply looking for pattern recognition. And you can see here the images at the bottom are from a family Christmas a few years ago. Google has seen candles and decided that means birthday. This is a really good example of showing us how these technologies work. They work by shape recognition. So it doesn't have the social context that candles can also appear at Christmas and birthdays. If we think about Alexa or other smart devices, These devices and an extension, Amazon employees, are listening to our conversations, but Alexa, can't really understand my Irish accent, and my arguments with her seem to outweigh any useful assistance it provides. Again, I think we've all been in the position where we've had to shout at a smart speaker and make multiple requests while it tries to interpret what we're saying. And these technologies will get better with time. They already have since the first iterations. The landscape and shared language around AI technologies is complex, and the debates around the use of AI taking place across society, from policing to insurance, education to healthcare. So before we can really begin to examine data collection and processing challenges within a museum context, we must first consider the role that data has begun to play in wider society. In the UK and the US, we live in a really data-saturated society, with algorithmic decision-making policies and processes being used to decide on cancer treatment, prison sentences, and the price we pay for home or car insurance. Data saturation in the UK and US has been brought about in two ways. Firstly, neoliberal ideals of metrics have popularized the collection of data for both states and individuals. So if we think about the state-controlled social credit system in China, to the privately driven strive for personal development and health in the UK and US through technologies such as Fitbit. But secondly, pervasive digital technologies have created new tools for the creation, collection, and analysis of data on a scale never really seen before. Data that has the power to radically change society as we know it. This slide shows some stories from recent years, which really demonstrate the pervasive and kind of wide social context which conversations around AI are happening. And it's important that we situate conversations around AI in cultural management with wider conversations about efficacy, ethics, and also we look at the consequences of these technologies on diverse populations, not just traditional visitors to our cultural institutions. So what's the point of this backstory? I think my take on AI and where we're at with it is AI filters my life and my experience is more efficient for it. It helps me get from A to B. It helps me find information I need and quickly. But for me, the trade-off for an efficient life is less opportunity for discovery and creativity. And it's a life viewed through the prism of those that program the machine. So I think it's fair to say that the landscape is complicated. These technologies are exciting and they offer lots of promise and opportunity. Some of them are quite banal and bland. They perform basic functions. Others are much more nuanced, and the social context in which they've been developed and trained is much more complicated. And so it's from this position or this foundation that my research into museums' use of AI technology really begins. I'm going to pause for a minute here and I'm going to ask you just to I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do this. I'm not going to ask you to share it so you can write this list for yourself. I want you to think through these questions on the slide and start to write a list of technology that you use in your everyday life. So I'm using technology in a really broad sense here. So I'm thinking about technology platforms. So this might include social media, search platforms. You might want to also think about tools that you use in your own research or your own studies. So Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Google Drive. You might want to also think about in-house technologies such as smart speakers or Ring doorbells. I'll give you a couple of minutes. I'm going to stop talking to just start to make a list. It doesn't have to be a definitive list. You'll notice what I've asked at the end is for you to keep coming back and adding to this list for a week. So every time you use your phone or you use a technology platform, I want you to pull this list up and add to it. Because when you create this list, you start to begin a conversation in terms of critical technology discourse. Rather than simply using the technology, you acknowledge your use of it. Okay, so hopefully you've got the start of a list. When I do this activity with students, quite often the list is quick and short. And when they revisit it a week later, it's 4 times as long because, like we all do, you use technology without thinking about it. And as soon as you start to acknowledge it every time, suddenly you recognize how much of your life is shaped by the technology that we use. So I would encourage you to keep coming back to this list. It's also a good list to ask friends and family to do as well. It's interesting to compare what people, what technology platforms people use on a regular basis. So we started there with a little bit of a context in terms of thinking about AI in popular culture, in reality, but also about how we use technology more broadly. And we started a conversation in what I call critical technology discourse. So we moved from simply being users of these technologies to beginning a conversation with how we use these technologies and how they influence how we see the world and how we experience the world. And so really, this is how we began to use these case studies, these wider instances of AI technologies being used across society to develop a framework of inquiry that would allow us to develop new modes of practice and critically to support professionals engaging with these technologies in museums and galleries. So we've done some work in terms of scene setting outside museums. And what I want to move to now is introducing some examples of how museums and galleries are engaging with AI technologies. And it's a little bit of a survey. Some of them are what we'd call quite old examples within this field, and some of them are much newer. This example is from 2016. Tate Museums in London launched the IK Prize around this time. And the IK Prize was designed to award a commissioning budget to a technology-led project that engaged with the museum's collection. And in 2016, Fabrica, an arts collective, developed Recognition. Recognition was an early example of computer vision or machine vision technology. And it used the museum's collection database, so the digital images that existed of the museum's collection, and analysed them against live reporting of news. So if you go on Google News and you type in a topic, you get images from a variety of news sources. And it used that data stream to visually analyse current news stories imagery with the collection. So you can see here in this image, the white text outlines and tells us what the visual similarities are and why they've been matched. What was interesting about this example was that the raw data, so this white text that tells us why it sees the visual similarities, was displayed on show in the gallery. So there was no human augmentation or quality control checks. Instead, the machine's vision, or the black box, the way it sees the world, was in public display for all to see. This meant that at times there were errors, and the errors were displayed in the gallery. Quite an interesting approach in terms of recognizing the flaws and potentiality of these technologies, rather than simply showing us the end result, which would be the 2 images. Tate chose to instead show us the end result, but also put front and center the technology and process that led to this curatorial decision by the machine to place images together. In this example from 2018, Dr. Olivia Vane used color search to support Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York to make their collection more accessible and relevant to designers. If we think about how designers search and view the world, color is central to what they do. Tagging each item in the museum's digital database with colors would be a lengthy and extensive process. It's also quite a remedial process. It's an obvious one for a computer to do, because color, in the instance of design, has very little limitations or social challenges. So you can see here, this search function called dive into color allows you to search the museum's collection, not by object type, date, history, or designer, but instead purely by color. A really good example of how museums can demonstrate contemporary relevance by engaging with emerging technologies. This example from Harvard Art Museum demonstrates how a variety of machine vision technologies can view and interpret an art collection. On the left, you see an image, and I think the image tag has dropped off my slide, but this is a piece of contemporary art. And we can see here 4 different machine vision tools that have analyzed this image. The number that you see beside each word is the percentage or degree of certainty that the computer is, or on the accuracy of the tag that the computer has provided. And I think my favorite one I've highlighted in blue is that Microsoft is 39% sure that this piece of contemporary art is a bathroom with graffiti on the wall. So this again gives us some indication in terms of the degree of accuracy and certainty that these technologies currently operate in. However, again, these technologies are rapidly developing, and the accuracy at which the computers or machines view the world and understand the world is rapidly improving. But by looking at this raw data, we can also begin to see some of the potential challenges in terms of language. So for example, all of these computer vision searches have identified metadata tags, but the tags have been defined by a human. So the machine only knew to look for art or graffiti on the wall of a bathroom because a human told them it was something they should look for. So the autonomy of the machine to identify what it wants to look for and define what it wants to look for is limited. It comes back to this idea that machines and computers are programmed by humans, and therefore, whilst they may have independent functionality, the search parameters and the parameters in which they view the world have been defined by humans. So we move on to another example. The case studies that we've looked at so far have been focused very much on collections. This is an example that focuses much more on visitor experience and ticket sales. The National Gallery in London worked with an Irish company to develop a predictive analytics dashboard. Using data on an artist's popularity on Wikipedia, what art movement they sit within, the marketing spend of an exhibition, how far through the run of an exhibition you are, the time of year, the day of the week, and in future will also include weather and special events. These data points allow National Gallery to predict with a pretty high degree of certainty how many visitors they will have to their paid exhibitions on any given day. Longer term, this technology will help the gallery to decide how long an exhibition should run for. It can help the gallery to think about the size of an exhibition, the physical space and footfall that will be required for an exhibition. But technology like this can also be used to help refine exhibition titles so that exhibitions are more discoverable and can be found easier online. Again, we can see here from a business perspective or sales perspective why this is good. But we can also see why a curator may find this problematic. Should the Wikipedia popularity really dictate the name of an exhibition at the National Gallery? Conceptually, we might say no, but from a business perspective, yes. And so these are some of the tensions that we see when these technologies are applied within a museum context. Again, there's no definitive answer, but instead there's boundaries and discussions to be had at every point. So if we go to America now, this is an interesting example that brings together a number of different types of AI technologies. Ada and Grace, which is at the Museum of Science in Boston, is an interactive exhibition that presents two virtual educators who answer visitor questions and suggest exhibitions that they might like. But for me, what's most interesting about this technology or this exhibit is that Ada and Grace themselves explain how they work. So they explain the concept of natural language processing to their visitors. Explainability is one of the key concerns in wider society when it comes to using artificial intelligence. So it seems to me that museums are a pivotal place for explainable technologies and critical technology discourse to happen. Whilst I have to admit I've limited interest in robotics and I've seen limited interesting examples in museums, I feel like when you do a talk on AI, everyone expects a robot. So I always include one. This is Pepper. Pepper is a robot that was produced by SoftBank Robotics. I'm pretty sure these robots have now been discontinued, but they were given as a gift to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, DC, who tested them in a number of different contexts across their museums. The National Museum of African Art used Pepper to translate Kiswahili phrases into English, while the National Museum of African American History and Culture used the robot as a way to welcome in non-traditional visitors to the museum and to help to orientate visitors to the Rosa Parks virtual reality experience. So they used it as an onboarding tool and as a conversation starter to welcome and make people comfortable as they entered this new space. We've also been working with some museums in Germany who are using interesting approaches to AI technologies. I've provided a couple of kind of brief insights here, but we've got further documentation of each of these German projects in our recent German publication that I have a link to at the end of my presentation. This example is using AI technology to investigate how the language barrier in terms of technical language that's used in museums and galleries could be made more inclusive and accessible. The Curator Project is interesting because it has two focuses to it. The first is to offer AI-based recommendations that assist users to delve deeper into the museum and their collection. Again, it focuses on translating technical terms. But secondly, Curator also is interested in supporting visitors to engage in storytelling and looking at how AI technologies can be used to facilitate creativity and innovation for museum collections. The Ludwig Forum is looking at how computer vision and machine vision can be used to help to train, how it can be trained on their existing data to support curators to be able to digitize and increase the searchability of already digital collections. And I think what a really good point that they make in terms of how they define their project, they say that the aim is not to replace human curators, but to convert them into support research processes. The curatorial everyday life in museums shows a natural limitation in knowledge of the collections and inclusion in research and exhibition. So by using AI technologies, museums can start to increase the discoverability of their collections. They can add gaps, or they can fill gaps in knowledge that may be beyond the knowledge of a curator. So thinking particularly here about objects in museum collections that have limited curatorial knowledge. So if we think about people went and traveled the world and they came home with their wares and they give them to museum, only a very small amount of museum collections receive curatorial attention and time. And so actually AI technology provides a way to engage with the collection that is beyond the reach or the capacity of curatorial insights. So there's some examples of different projects that currently exist in museums. We've mapped over 122 projects, and I think this mapping was last updated over a year ago, so there's been a lot more projects since. We see a real range of how AI technologies is used in museums. Our examples are primarily drawn from Europe and America. And for us, we really split this down to two main use cases. The first being collections management and curatorial, so thinking about art and objects. And the second is visitor management and business management. So this is the side where we think about ticket sales, we think about ticket prices, we think about how we manage and staff exhibitions. So across these 122 projects that we've mapped, we've also mapped the data points that are used in collections, or sorry, in AI technologies in museums. So you can see here, this is drawn from a book chapter that we published that looked at data ethics in a museum context, specifically focusing on AI. We identified first the source of data. Then we identified the methods and tools that are used to collect that data. And finally, we mapped that to the privacy policy or the legal framework that exists around how that data is collected and processed, both in the UK and the US. So again, this is beginning to open this conversation about critical technology discourse. The source of data aligns to the activity I asked you to complete earlier when I asked you, what platforms do you use? If we were to take that one step further, the question I would ask you to map against is, what data are you providing to that web platform or that digital technology? How do they collect it and how do they process it? And finally, what's the legal framework around you as a user? How is your data and your privacy protected? Are there legal protections or are there ethical frameworks that support you using those platforms? So again, we're beginning to start to delve deeper into simply becoming users, to critically engaging with these technologies and asking how they collect data and how they use data. So you can see here, this is another slide that really outlines more sources of data that are used commonly in museums. These data points primarily focus on visitor data and rather than collections data. So we're thinking more about personal data and how it's provided to institutions. So across this mapping work that we've done, we also looked at categorizations of types of AI technologies. So you can see here, we've created our own definitions. So we examined the amount of projects fall into the category of bot, robots, and voice search. The amount of projects that fall into the definition of computer vision. We've looked at projects and mapped them against machine learning, natural language processing, and then those that sit beyond that we've defined as other AI tools. So again, useful to see what type of technologies are being used. So rather than simply saying AI, breaking it down and thinking, well, what are the technologies? What's the data that feeds the technologies? And what's the impact and outcome of how those technologies are being used on visitors and collections? So this mapping work allowed us to create a series of research questions that will never have definitive answers, and the conversation around answering each of these will change depending on the museum, the people in the room, the technology, and the context in which you're working. On the left-hand side, you can see questions that relate to visitor data. Do museums have the necessary data governance and processes in place to manage AI? How does the current museum sector code of ethics and regulations cover the rapidly growing AI field? What are the best ethical practices to collect and analyze data with AI? What skills might museum workers need to have to work with AI to gain visitor insights? On the right-hand side, we then move on to focusing our research on collections data. How can museums minimize algorithmic biases to interpret their collections? Would the lack of diversity in the museum and AI fields be reflected in the outcomes of using these technologies? What are the implications of museums engaging with big tech companies? For the rest of my presentation today, I'm going to focus on one aspect or one response that we developed to these multiple research questions. And that's a term that we've defined as bias squared. If we think about the creation of metadata and mass data analysis, it's appealing for busy museum professionals to use these technologies. It's also really important that we think about the wider ethical concerns. Machines, much like museums, are inherently biased. As such, whilst AI tools may provide valuable metadata for an online collection or help us to know when our galleries will be busy, they can also generate problems for museums. So if we think about bias, it's inherent in museums. They've been made and curated by humans. But they're also inherent in machines because machines have been programmed by humans. So when you put these two together, we get bias squared. That's the multiplier that occurs when museum bias is multiplied by machine bias. Whilst museums are working to eradicate bias in their collections, some more radically so than others, a blind adoption of the promise of AI could create new modes of bias, unknowingly introduced in parallel to, or perhaps more accurately, in contrast to wider decolonization efforts in another department. As such, understanding these technologies, or more specifically, the data that they use, the data that's used to teach the machine, and the algorithms used to make decisions is really crucial to ensuring the integrity of any application of these technologies within museums. Ross Perry is a professor in museums and digital culture. And I think his framing of this is quite useful. In his work, he says, as the museum moves into new social, situated, sensory, and semantic media spaces, so its ethical framework needs to adjust and respond to the implications and consequences of these new interactions and interventions. So what do ethical frameworks look like? These are some examples that we looked at in the UK and US context. The Museum Association Code of Ethics, the American Alliance of Museum Code of Ethics, the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, the International Council of Museums. But we also look beyond museums to look at the codes of ethics that digital practitioners align themselves with. So we also examined the Association for Computer Machinery's Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. All of these provided helpful insights into different practical understandings of what ethics looks like in a museum context. This was another important quote in helping us to think about how we define this context. Adopting AI in a context-specific and culturally sensitive manner is a complicated task, but it's one that is possible. And I like this quote from Elizabeth Merritt, who says, anytime you talk about an emerging technology, museums have an important role to play teaching the public about it. Artificial intelligence is going to be incredibly important in shaping the world we live in profound ways. We need to understand the technology and the issues it raises. So how do we go about understanding it? So I worked with Dr. Elena Villa-Espesa from Pratt Institute in New York to set up the Museums and AI Network. The network sought to develop new policies and practices. And to do that, we took a very participatory and co-design approach. We worked with 50 experts from a range of large-scale national institutions in London and New York. We worked with 6 different universities, 15 different museums, and we also worked with 200 members of the public to develop policies and practices that would allow for ethically robust processes that could be used within the museum context. We asked those participants, what are the challenges that you're currently facing and what tools could be developed to support you? And you can see a couple of quotes on this slide. And so one of the first things that we began to do was to develop workshop formats and prototype worksheets that could be co-curated with our expert panel, but then could be adopted and used widely across the sector. As you can see from the scrawlings and notes in this, we got lots of feedback and advice in terms of what was missing. The opportunity to write the title of a project was something that we overlooked. But you can see here how through developing this with practitioners, we were able to understand the questions and challenges that they faced. But we were also able to think about what solutions we could offer in terms of process planning and process map journeys that would allow them to engage with AI technologies in the context of ethics at the early stages of project design. The result of these worksheets and workshop formats was the development of an open access toolkit. And so I'm not going to talk through the toolkit in detail. What I'm going to just give you some context into what is contained within it and why we included that. For us, the best technologies provide solutions to questions or challenges faced by a museum rather than existing as an additional layer to a museum's core mission. So the toolkit was designed to be really focused on mission. Technology used well can help you to further your mission. The toolkit begins by asking why AI? Why would you want to use this technology? Is it relevant? Is it appropriate? We then began the next stage of the toolkit, examine some of the challenges around ethics and social constructs, providing this critical lens that then can be used to develop your own project. So you can see here an example scenario that we've used. Your museum is planning to apply computer vision to your collection images. The goal of this initiative is to automatically generate subject tags, identify colors and shapes, and link objects that are visually similar. Ultimately, you would like to enhance user experience of the online collection, adding new features and browsing options to the website. So how do you begin to develop that project? Our first worksheet focuses on AI capabilities and looks at what tools and experience and knowledge you need within your institution, but also examines technical possibilities and the external environment. So you can see here some examples of responses to how this has been used in a professional context. On the left-hand side of the worksheet, you can see a series of prompts that are designed to encourage project teams to ask difficult questions. So this first worksheet is really designed as an initial concept map of the project. I've included a couple of different slides here. These ones were I think the second two came from workshops that we held in Germany with cross-museum teams coming together to really think about what the concerns would be and what their considerations would be when beginning to develop their project plans. What I think is quite interesting across the 4 examples I have is the similarities that we see, but also the points of difference. So again, having a systematic approach to project development allows institutions to share their knowledge and experience of project planning and implementation when it comes to AI technologies. I'm not going to provide worked examples of the following sheets, but just to give you an example of then, once you've got this initial project concept, the next stage in project development is thinking about the AI ethics workflow. How do you embed ethics, checks and measures throughout the process to ensure the quality of the data, the integrity of the data that you're inputting, the data you're processing, but also crucially the output of the AI technologies. And this is really about ensuring that the work that you're doing is socially purposed and aligns with the public nature of museums and cultural institutions. And finally, we move to the stakeholder map. So beginning to think about the internal, external stakeholders and service users that will engage with AI technologies when implemented in a cultural institution. That's quite a quick run through of the toolkit, but it's designed to be used. So I think it's really useful and really encourage you to go and have a look at it and think about how you can maybe use it in your own work. The toolkit was originally published in English, but we've just this year published a German version and a Spanish version. The German version has case studies from New York, London, and Germany. And the German case studies are quite recent. I think most of them were last year, so there are kind of newer case studies. So for the purpose of this project, we really took the view that AI is not a single technology, but instead it's best understood as a plurality of technologies. What these technologies share is this core similarity. All that fall within this definition rely on data to enable them to function. Indeed, the conversation around AI is often oversimplified, with many of the technologies that sit within this popular understanding falling far short of having sentient intelligence. Instead, what we see is advanced algorithmic decision-making. As such, it's important that museums not only understand the technology they intend to use, but also what data it will require as input and what data it will generate as output. It's this complexity of these technologies, their current and near future applications, and the science fiction, popular culture narratives that this research really took as a starting point and embedded throughout. So thinking back to that mapping work that you did in terms of your own technology use, throughout the next week, I'd really encourage you to think about, how does that technology shape your life? How does it change how you view the world? And how would your life be different if you no longer use Google Maps, or you no longer let Google or Gmail finish your emails? Would you be freer? Would you be more creative? Or would you be lost and less productive? Again, there's no right answer, but instead what I'm really interested in is the fuzzy edges of how having critical engagement with technology can help us to be more conscious consumers and users of these technologies. I'm not going to do these now. I'm just going to talk through a couple of examples that I encourage you to go and do in your own time. They're useful tools in terms of thinking practically about how AI technologies can work. So whether it's the first one's more data processing than AI. But a couple of websites, they're quite useful if you want to get hands-on, you want to play with some data. So the first one is Google Trends. Google Trends is a really nice web-based tool that allows you to type in or input multiple search topics, and it maps them against how those terms are used in search. So an example I quite often use with my students is, if you're working in a museum and you're developing a new program, should you call it a kids program, a family program, or a children's program? by typing these terms into Google Trends, you can see what terms are most popularly searched. And it gives you definitions, or it gives you the breakdown in terms of country focus. So if your program is for children in the UK, that might be the most appropriate term. But actually, if it's a children's program in London, but your focus is on American tourists, you might want to call it a kids program. So a very nice, very simple tool, no kind of tech knowledge needed. You're simply putting in words, but just useful to see how the machine interprets those words. The second one then is reverse image search. So this is something that I quite often use for plants. I'm big into gardening, and I'll quite often take photos of plants when I'm out in fancy public gardens and reverse image search to find out what's the name of it, what is the plant. So again, very simple. You simply drag and drop a photo in, and Google will search the internet to find similar images for you. It's using basic computer vision, machine vision technology. It's looking for colors, patterns, recognition. But useful again to see visually how Google views the world. And so again, thinking about this idea of how we then categorize how we see the world. So visual language or metadata is translating that pattern into linguistic codes that we understand. And you can see here an example of how different computer vision systems have viewed this image, but you can also see then the curatorial tags at the top. This tool here was created by John Stack, who's Director of Digital at the Science Museum Group in the UK. So the link at the bottom, you can just keep clicking refresh, and it lets you click through the Science Museum's collection. And on yellow, or on the yellow tags, we can see what the machine sees. So it allows you to see how the machine is viewing the museum's collection. On the bottom of the image, you can see the collection tag and information. So you can see how accurate the machine has been in contrast to the museum collection. So I think in that the top right image, it's a glass specimen bottle which contains skins of silkworms. And you can see on the yellow tags that the machine has not quite got the nuance of that very complicated image. But that's a fun one just to click through again so that you can see and experience what this looks like in practicality. So again, taking that a step further, you can then use your own image and you can drop and drag it into Google Vision, and it will give you this percentage tag. So it will tell you what it sees in the same way. So these yellow tags, you can generate them yourself of any image that you have, and you can see what Google sees, what Google understands the image to be. So again, useful just to understand the mechanics of how visual search works. This kind of goes behind the hood a little bit and gives you those kind of linguistic tags and how it categorizes those patterns that it's recognizing. This is a really nice one. Kind of all of these kind of examples are really nice ones to do with someone else. So before you put an image through Google Vision, ask somebody else to write a series of tags that describe it, and compare and contrast how you see the world, how your friend sees the world, and how the computer sees the world, because quite often for the same image, they'll all be very different. Okay, so really kind of starting to wrap up there. For me, my kind of big takeaway about AI is it's already here. It's already been used. Machine learning is going to become more important, easier, and quicker to use very quickly. as cultural professionals, we really need to critically engage with these technologies rather than simply blindly adopt them based on the promise of big tech. Understanding these technologies and the data that they use is really central to our responsibility as cultural practitioners. And I think sitting in this fuzzy boundary between opportunity and challenges is where museums and creative practitioners really thrive and can do well. And I think that's the space that's going to grow in the coming years, rather than this kind of polarized version of utopia or dystopia. I think the interesting space in the middle is where cultural practice is really going to thrive. So I've linked here to our website. On it, you'll find all of our publications. So we have a couple of journal articles, a couple of book chapters. I've also included the link to the toolkits. So you'll find the English version there, but also the German version. So they are open access and free to download. And we really encourage people to use them. And if you are using them, we're very happy to answer questions on how you can facilitate workshops using them. So that is my kind of talk for today, my introduction to AI, and really a survey of how these technologies are being used now in museums, but also framing some of the questions and challenges that are going to come as these technologies become more adopted widely across cultural institutions.